Chapter 5. Tom lunged at the boy in black and drew up short. His eyes were fixed on something at his feet. Jenny couldn't understand it. It was as if he saw something terrifying there on the carpet. He turned to get away from it and stopped. It was behind him too. Slowly he backed up against the wall. Jenny was staring at him in dismay. It was like watching one of the mimes out at Venice Beach. A very good mime. Jenny could tell that the things Tom was facing were small, that they were trying to climb up his legs, and that he was terribly afraid of them. But there was nothing on the carpet. "Tom," she said in a thin voice, and took a step. "Don't come near me. They'll get you too." It was awful. Tom, who was never afraid of anything, was cornered by empty air. His lips were drawn back from his teeth. His chest was heaving. "What is it?" Summer whimpered. The others were all staring in silence. Jenny whirled on the boy in black, who was leaning against the parlor wall and watching in amusement. "What are you doing to him?" "In the game, you have to face your nightmares. This is just a free sample of Tom's. No reason for the rest of you to be in on it." Jenny faced Tom, drawing a deep breath. She took a step toward him. "Stay back," Tom said, sharp and frightened. "Doesn't look like he's conquered it yet," Julian remarked. Jenny stepped right into the midst of what Tom was staring at. She felt nothing but air around her bare ankles. She saw nothing, but Tom did. He yanked her to him, to the wall, falling down with her to his knees. He kicked out. "Tom, don't! There's nothing there. Tom, look at me." His green-flecked eyes were wild. "Keep away from her. Keep back." He was scuffing with his outstretched foot at the empty floor beside Jenny, trying to push something away. His mouth was quivering with disgust. "Tom," she sobbed, shaking him. He didn't even glance at her. She buried her face in his shoulder, holding him with all her strength, trying to will him sane again. And then her arms collapsed in on themselves. It was like one of those magician's tricks where the beautiful girl is hidden beneath a sheet, and then the sheet caves in and falls to the floor. Tom was there. Tom wasn't there. Like that. Jenny's embracing arms were empty. She screamed and looked helplessly, wildly down at her hands, at her lap, at the floor. Tom couldn't be gone. He was. She looked behind her and saw that the others were too. Jenny's eyes darted to the dim hallway. It was empty. The curtains over the window were flat and still. But Dee was gone, and Audrey was gone, and Zack and Michael and Summer were all gone from the parlor. All 5 of them. without a sound, the way things vanish in dreams. Please let it be a dream, Jenny thought. I've had enough now. Please, I'm sorry. Let it be a dream. She was clutching the carpet so tensely that her fingernails were bending back. It hurt, and the pain didn't wake her up. Nothing changed. Her friends were still gone. The boy in black was still there. Where did they go? What did you do with them? She said. She was so dazed that it came out as a sort of insane calm. Julian smiled whimsically. They're upstairs, scattered around the house, waiting to face their nightmares, waiting for you. You'll find them as you go through the game. As I go? Jenny said stupidly. Look, you don't understand. I don't know what's... You're the main player here, no? He interrupted, gently chiding. The door back to your world is at the top of the house, and it's open. If you can get to it, you can go. Bring your friends, and they can leave too. Jenny's mind was still stuck on one thing. Where's Tom? I want... Your Tom is at the top. He pronounced the name as if it were something not mentioned in polite society. I'll be giving him my special attention. You'll see him when you get there, if you get there. Look, please, I don't want to play any game. Jenny was still speaking as if this was all a mistake that would be cleared up somehow, as long as she stayed rational, as long as she avoided his eyes. I don't know what you're thinking, but... He interrupted again. And if you don't get there, then I win, and you stay here with me. What do you mean, with you? Jenny said sharply, jerked out of her courtesy. He smiled. I mean that you stay in this place, in my world, with me as mine. Jenny stared at him, and then she was on her feet, her composure shattering. You are out of your mind, she said. She would have lunged at him herself if she had ever had any practice at violence. Careful, Jenny. She stopped, frightened by what she sensed in him. Looking into his eyes, she saw something so alien, so terrifying that she couldn't move. It was then, at last, that she believed what was happening. Full realization of what this boy had done, of everything that had happened tonight, crashed in on her. The young man standing before her looked almost human, could do magic. Oh God, she whispered. All her violence had drained away, replaced by a fear older and deeper than anything she had ever experienced. An old recognition, Something inside her knew him from a time when girls took skin bags to the river to get water, a time when panthers walked in the darkness outside mud huts, from a time before electric lights, before candles, when darkness was fended off with stone lamps, when darkness was the greatest danger of all. Jenny looked at the boy standing beside her with his hair shining like moonlight. If darkness had taken on a face and a voice, if the powers of night had gathered themselves together and formed themselves into a human being, they would have made something like this. "Who are you?" whispered Jenny. "Don't you know yet?" Jenny shook her head. "Never mind, you will, before the game is over." Jenny tried to regain her calm. "Look, let's just—" "You were at the game store." "I was waiting for you." "So this was all set up? But why me? Why are you doing this to me?" Jenny could feel hysteria tugging at her again. Then he said it. He was looking at her with eyes like the sky on a November morning, one corner of his mouth turned up. He spoke gravely and a little formally. "Because," he said, "I have fallen in love with you." Jenny stared at him. "Surprised? You shouldn't be. I first saw you a long time ago. You were such a pretty little girl, as if there was sunshine all around you. Do you know the story of Hades?" "What?" She didn't like this mercurial jumping from subject to subject. "Hades," he said encouragingly, like someone helping her cram for a final. "Greek god of the underworld, ruler there. He lived in the world of shadows, and he was lonely. And then one day he looked up to the earth's surface and saw Persephone, picking wild flowers, I think, laughing. He fell in love with her on the spot. He wanted to make her his queen, but he knew perfectly well she wouldn't go with him willingly. So, Jenny got out. So he hitched his black horses to his chariot, and the earth split open in front of Persephone's feet, and her wild flowers fell to the ground. "That's a story," Jenny said, trying to keep her voice steady. "A myth. There's no such person as Hades." "Are you sure?" After a moment, Julian went on. "Anyway, you are luckier than Persephone, Jenny. You have a chance to get away. I could just take you, but I'm giving you a chance." He looked at Jenny with eyes like liquid sapphires, wild, exotic eyes. She couldn't speak, couldn't look away. "Who are you?" she whispered again. "Who do you want me to be?" "I love you, Jenny. I came from the world of shadows to get you. I'll be anything you like, give you anything you want. Do you like jewels? Emeralds to match your eyes? Diamonds? He reached outspread fingers toward her throat, not quite touching. What about clothes? A different outfit for every hour of the day, in colors you've never imagined. Pets? Have a marmoset or a white tiger. Far off places? You can lie in the sun at Cabo San Lucas or Cote d'Azur. Anything, Jenny. Just imagine. Jenny covered her face with her hands. You are crazy. I can make your wildest dreams come true. Literally. Ask me for something. Something you thought you could never have. Quick, I may not make the offer again. Jenny was almost sobbing. His voice, soft and insistent, made her feel as if she were falling. She had a terrifying desire to collapse in his arms. Now, Jenny, while we're still friends. Later, things won't be so pleasant. I don't want to hurt you, but I will if it's necessary. Save yourself a lot of pain and bother and let me make you happy now. Give in. Yield to me. It's going to happen eventually anyway. The sensation of falling vanished. Jenny's head snapped up. Oh, really? I never lose. Something was waking up in Jenny. Usually she got angry quickly and got over it as quickly, like a summer cloudburst. Now she felt the slow kindling of something different, a deliberate, steady fury that would burn a long time. Careful, Jenny, Julian said again, softly. I will never give in to you, Jenny told him, equally soft. I'll die first. It won't come to that, I hope, but other things might happen. Once you start playing the game, I can't change the rules. Your friends might suffer. What? How? He shook his head at her. Jenny, Jenny, don't you understand anything that's going on? They're all playing the game. They agreed to take the risks. Now they'll have to take the consequences. He turned. No, wait. It's too late, Jenny. I gave you a chance. You refused it. From now on, we'll be playing the game. But you can start with this riddle. Turning back, head tilted slightly, he recited, I am just 2 and 2. I am hot. I am cold. I am the parent of numbers that cannot be told. I am a gift beyond measure, a matter of course, and I am yielded with pleasure when taken by force. Jenny shook her head. That tells who you are? He laughed. No, that tells what I want from you. Give me the answer, and I'll let one of your friends go." Jenny pushed the riddle to the back of her mind. It didn't make any sense, and while Julian was in the room, it was impossible to concentrate on anything else but him. In all this time, he hadn't lost his whimsical good cheer, his charm. He was obviously loving this game, having a wonderful time. "That's all," he said. "Let the game begin. By the way, if you get hurt in these nightmares, you get hurt for real. If you die, you die. And I can tell you right off that one of you probably won't make it." Jenny's head jerked up. "Who?" That would be telling. Let's just say that one of you probably doesn't have the strength to get through. Oh, and did I mention the time limit? The door in the turret, the door back to your own world, is going to close at dawn, which tomorrow is exactly 6:11. If you can't get it by then, you're stuck here. So don't waste your time. Here's something to remind you." Far away but clear, an unseen clock chimed. Jenny turned toward the sound, counting unconsciously as it struck. 10. When she turned back, Julian was gone. Jenny held herself motionless. There was no sound. The fringe on the green velvet lamp rippled slightly. Otherwise, the room was still. For an instant, just being alone was enough to panic her. She was by herself in a house that didn't exist. No, don't freak. Think. You can look around now. Maybe there's a way out of here. She went to the window, pulled the heavy peacock blue curtain aside. Then she froze. At first, she simply stared, breath catching in her throat, feeling her eyes go wide like a deer's. Then she whipped the curtain back in place, jerking it past the closing point, pressing it against the window with her hands. She could hardly make herself let go of the velvety material, but she did, and then she backed away quickly. She didn't want to see outside again. A landscape of elemental terror, like something out of the Ice Age, as painted by a mad impressionist. A blizzard with huge, ungainly shapes lumbering through it, blue and green flashes like lightning giving glimpses of deformed creatures crawling over icy ground, twisted pinnacles of rock corkscrewing up toward the blank white sky. She wouldn't survive a minute out there. When the devil goes ice skating, Jenny thought. So what if hell's already frozen? Oh, how funny. Michael would appreciate that. She felt tears sting her nose, her eyes. She stood hunched and miserable, hugging her own elbows in the center of the empty room. She had never felt so alone or so frightened. She missed her friends desperately. Dee's courage, Michael's humor, Audrey's practicality. Even Summer would give Jenny someone to protect. And as for Zack, she wanted to find out what was wrong with him. In all the years she had known him, she had never seen him act this way. But most of all, she wanted Tom. Tom, she thought fiercely. He's the one in trouble, not you. He's going through God knows what, getting Julian's special attention. And you have no business standing here mourning while that's happening. The yelling at herself actually helped. It shut up the babbling little voices in the back of her mind telling her that she couldn't deal. Julian had said it depended on her. All right, she was calmer now. She knew she had to start moving. But where? Jenny tried to gather her scattered thoughts, to remember the configuration of the paper house. The parlor had been off a long central hallway on the first floor. At the end of that hallway there had been a staircase. Upstairs, Julian had said. Jenny found herself moving through the candlelit hallway, past gold-framed portraits which looked down disapprovingly from the walls. She looked up at the stairway. It was wide, carpeted down the middle. There was absolutely nothing strange about it, and Jenny couldn't force herself to put a foot on it. I could turn around and run, she thought. It was impossible to realize emotionally that she couldn't just go back into the parlor and find a way home. But intellectually, she knew there was nothing in the parlor to help her, and she didn't want to think what she might see if she opened the front door of this house. So you can stay here and hide, or you can go up. You have to choose. She put a foot on the stairway. It was solid, like any stairway. She started climbing toward the darkness at the top. The hallway on the second floor seemed to stretch on forever in both directions, so dark that Jenny couldn't see any end to it. There were candles in brass candle holders at intervals on the walls, but they were far apart and didn't give much light. Jenny didn't remember any hall in the paper house looking this way. In fact, what this place really looked like was the haunted mansion at Disneyland. Like every other kid in Southern California, Jenny had been to Disneyland. So often she knew it by heart, and she recognized the creepy wallpaper. But that was ridiculous. Why should it look like that? She walked with fingertips brushing the wall. A dozen steps down the hall, she saw something far ahead in the dimness, moving under the flickering light of a candle. Jenny didn't know whether to run away or toward it. Then she noticed something familiar in the long legs and the greyhound build of the figure. Dee! Dee barely glanced up as Jenny reached her. She was wrestling with a door which bulged just like a door in the haunted mansion, the one that had always scared Jenny as a child. A lot of the things in the haunted mansion were simply silly, and a lot of others were mind-boggling, but only one thing there had ever really frightened Jenny when she was young, and that was a door. A closed door which bulged in the middle as if a great weight was leaning on it from the inside, deforming the wood, expanding, relaxing, while all the time guttural snarls, not the sort of a human, not the sort of sounds a human could make, came from behind it. The door that Dee was wrestling was doing exactly the same thing, only it was open a little. Dee had her lynx-like body braced against it, head down, knees bent, one long slender leg back, so the toe of her sneaker dug into the black carpet of the hallway. But she couldn't quite get the door shut. Without a word, Jenny went and helped her, leaning to press on the door above and below the handle which Dee was grasping. The keyhole had a large key in it. "Push!" Dee gasped. Jenny leaned harder, throwing her weight behind it, while Dee pushed right above her, body stretched taut beside Jenny's. The door pushed back and bulged. The low, thick snarling rose in tone. Angrily, Jenny felt her muscles begin to tremble. She put her head down and shut her eyes, teeth locking. "Push!" The door yielded a crucial fraction of an inch, closing. Dee's hand shot to the key and turned it. There was a click, the sound of a bolt shooting home. The door wasn't pushing anymore. Jenny stumbled back, legs weak with a sudden release of strain, and looked at it. No bulging, no snarling now, either. It was just an ordinary six-paneled door, as quiet and innocent as a door could be. There was utter silence in the hallway. Jenny backed to the opposite wall, then slowly slid down it until she was resting on her heels. Her forehead was wet around her hair roots. Dee was leaning one hand against the wall by the door. "Hi," Jenny said at last. high. They continued to look at each other blankly. Have you seen the others? Dee shook his head. Me either, he said. You know, him. Jenny paused until Dee nodded. He said you guys were scattered around the house, waiting for your nightmares. Jenny looked at the door. Were you in there? No, I was in the parlor watching Tom, and then all of a sudden I got dizzy. I woke up on the floor here. There was only one door, and I wondered what was inside, so I opened it. Oh, what was inside? Just your average but ugly monster. Like the ones in the pictures. The creeper and the lurker or whatever? No, really ugly. Sort of like Coach Rogers. Dee was taking this rather calmly, Jenny thought. She looked strained and stern, but very beautiful, like a statue carved out of ebony. We'd better look around, she said. See if we can find the others. Okay. Jenny didn't move. Dee, still standing, reached out to her. Come on, up. I'm going to faint. Don't you dare. On your feet, soldier. Jenny got up. She looked down the hallway. I thought you said there was only one door. What's that then? It wasn't there before. They both looked at the door. It was just like the other one, six-paneled, innocuous. What do you think is behind this one? Jenny said carefully. Let's see. Dee reached for the knob. Wait, you lunatic! Trying not to flinch, Jenny pressed her ear to the wood. She couldn't hear anything but her own breathing. Okay, but be ready to shut it again fast. Dee flashed her a barbaric grin and stood ready to kick the door shut. Jenny put her hand on the knob, turned it. Now, Dee said, and Jenny flung the door open. Chapter 6. The room behind the door had golden ochre walls. On one of them, an African mask hung in primitive glory. Several clay sculptures rested on built-in teak shelving, including a bust that could have been Nefertiti. Leather cushions were tossed around the floor, one resting beside a complete home gym. It was Dee's bedroom. The bust was one that Dee's grandmother, Abba, had made of Dee. There was a stack of textbooks by the bed and a pile of half-completed homework on the nightstand. Jenny loved this room, loved to see what Abba would bring Dee next from her travels, but seeing it now was unnerving. Once they were inside, the door shut behind them and disappeared. When Jenny turned at the sound of slamming, she saw nothing but a blank ochre wall where the door used to be. Great. Now we're trapped, Jenny said. Dee was frowning. There must be a way out. They tried the window. Instead of the ice age outside, it was the ordinary view from Dee's upstairs room. Jenny could see the grass below, illuminated by a porch light, but the window wouldn't budge, or, as they discovered when Dee swung a 10-pound barbell against it, break. So now what? Jenny said. Why are we in your room? I don't understand what's going on. If this place is like a dream and we know we are dreaming it, we should be able to change things with our minds. Maybe we are supposed to make a way out of here. They both tried, with no results. No matter how hard Jenny concentrated on making the door reappear, nothing happened. I give up. Dee took off her jacket and flopped on the bed, as if this place really were her room. Jenny sat beside her, trying not to think. Her brain wasn't working properly. Shock, she supposed. All right, look. That guy said we are each supposed to face our nightmares. So this must be, she began, but Dee interrupted. What else did he say? Who is he? Oh, do you believe in the devil? Dee gave her a scornful look. The only devil I know is Dakaki, and he only makes you horny, according to Abba. I think he wanted me to believe he was the devil, Jenny said softly, but I don't know. And he wants us to play the game with him, just like the one in the box, only for real. If we get to the turret by dawn, we can go, Jenny said. If we don't, he wins. She looked at the other girl. Dee, aren't you scared of the supernatural? Dee shrugged. What's to be scared of? I always liked sword and sorcery stuff. I'm glad it's true. And I don't see why we can't beat him. I swore to kick the Shadow Man's ass before, and I'm going to. You wait. But this is all so crazy, Jenny said. Now that she had time to sit and think, reaction was setting in. She was shaking again. It's like you've always thought, sure, maybe there's ESP, maybe there are strange things out there in the dark, but you never think it could happen to you. Dee opened her mouth, but Jenny rushed on. And then it does, and everything's different, and it isn't possible, and it's still happening. She looked hard into the dark eyes with the slightly amber-tinted whites, desperate for understanding. That's right, Dee said briefly, returning Jenny's gaze. It is happening. So all the rules are changed. We have to adapt fast or we're not going to make it. But nothing, Jenny. You know what your problem is? You think too much. There's no point in talking about it anymore. What we have to worry about now is surviving. Dee's straightforward, razor-sharp mind had gone to the heart of the matter. What was happening, possible or not. They had to deal with it if they wanted to live. Jenny wanted to live. Right, she breathed. So we adapt. Dee flashed her brilliant smile. Besides, it's kind of fun, she said. Don't you think? Jenny thought of Tom cowering from something invisible on the floor. She leaned her forehead onto her fingertips. Something must scare you, though, she said after a minute, looking up. You drew a nightmare. Dee picked up a beaded double bracelet from the nightstand and examined it. My mom scares me. Really, she added at Jenny's disgusted look. Her stuff at the university, computers and all. Dee glanced toward the window. Jenny saw only the curtains made of applique cloth from Dahomey. You're afraid of technology? She said in disbelief. I am not afraid of technology. I just like to be able to deal with things, directly. Dee held up a slender clenched fist, and Jenny looked at the corded tendons in the dark forearm. No wonder Dee wasn't afraid of the sword and sorcery stuff. She fit right into the heroic mythos. It's the same reason I won't go to college, Dee said. I want to work with my hands and not at anything arty. Abba would smack you, Jenny told her. And your brain's as good as your hands. She broke off because Dee was once again looking at the window. Dee, what did you draw? She said, sitting up straight and finally asking the question she should have asked in the first place. Nothing's happening. What did you draw? A red light was blossoming outside the window, like the glow of a distant fire. Jenny wiped her head toward the crackling sound and saw that Dee's stereo had begun to smoke. What? Jenny breathed. Dee was already moving toward the window. What's going to happen? Jenny yelled, jumping up. She had to yell because of the throbbing sound that suddenly permeated the room. It resonated in Jenny's bones. Outside, a silhouette appeared against the light. Dee! Jenny grabbed for the other girl, trying to pull her away from the window. She was panicking and she knew it. The thing outside was huge, blocking out the stars, dull black and non-reflective itself, but hallowed in its own red glow. The eucalyptus trees outside were thrashing in a violent wind. "What is it?" Jenny screamed, dimly aware that Dee was clutching back at her. But that was a stupid question. What could it be, hovering outside a second-story window shaped like a half-sphere with the flat side down? As Jenny watched, 6 beams of light, bright as phosphorus flares, shot out from the bottom of the thing. One of the lights swung around to shine directly through the window. Jenny was blinded, but she heard the shivery tinkle of glass, and a blast of wind blew her head straight back. "The window's gone," she thought. The wind roaring past her was freezing and felt somehow electric. Behind her, a brass tray fell off a wooden stand with a crash. That was when Jenny found she couldn't move. The light was paralyzing her somehow, her muscles going like jelly. There was the strong, pungent odor of an electric storm. She was losing consciousness. "I'm going to die," she thought. "I'll never wake up." With a great effort, she turned her head toward Dee for help. Dee was facing the light stiffly, pupils contracted to pinpoints, unable to help Jenny or herself. "Fight," Jenny thought weakly. This time, fainting was like oozing into a black puddle of sludge. The room was round. Jenny was lying on a table that conformed to her body's shape. Her eyes were burning and tearing, and she felt a great disinclination to move. A white light shone down on her from above. "It's exactly the way I thought it would be," a husky voice said. Jenny fought off the lassitude enough to turn her head. Dee was on another table, a few feet away. "It's just like what I've read about the visitors, just like my dreams." Jenny had never thought much about UFOs at all, but this wasn't what she would have expected. The only thing she knew about aliens was that they did things to people. "So this was your nightmare," she said. Dee's perfect profile was tilted up toward the white spotlight above her, looking exactly like an Egyptian carving. "Oh, brilliant," she said. "Any other deductions?" "Yes," said Jenny. "We've got to get out of here." "Can't move," Dee said. "Can you?" There were no obvious restraints, but Jenny's arms and legs were too heavy to lift. She could breathe and move her torso a little, but her limbs were dead weights. "I'm scared," Jenny thought, and then she thought about how Dee must feel. As an athlete, physical healthiness was Dee's worst fear. The strong, slim body that she had cultivated with so much care was no use to her at all. This place, it's so sterile, Dee said, her nostrils flaring. Smell it? And I bet they're like hive insects all the same. If we could just get up to fight them. But they've got weapons, obviously. Jenny understood. Muscle and ingenuity wouldn't do anything against sterile, hellishly efficient technology. No wonder it was Dee's personal nightmare. Jenny noticed a movement in her peripheral vision. They were small, Summer's size. To Jenny, they looked like demons. Hairless, with slender bodies and large, glittering dark eyes. No noses, slits for mouths. Their skin glowed like bad mushrooms. Very pale mushrooms grown in a cellar without ever seeing the light. Jenny noticed an odor of almonds. They were alive, but they were as alien and wrong as the bleached things that crawl around at the bottom of caves. Just the sight of them struck Jenny with sick terror. They were naked, but Jenny couldn't see anything that would make them male or female. Their bodies were hideous blanks, like dolls' bodies. They are its, Jenny thought. Somehow, Jenny knew they were going to hurt her. Dee made a faint sound. Jenny turned toward her. It was easier than it had been the other time, and after an instant she realized that the spotlight above her had dimmed fractionally. Dee's light was brighter because Dee was trying to get away. Jenny had never seen Dee frightened before. Even in the parlor, Dee had looked more alert than anything else. But now, Dee looked like a terrified animal. Droplets of sweat stood on her forehead with the effort to move. The more she thrashed, the brighter the light above her got. "Dee, stop it," Jenny said, agonized. She couldn't stand to watch. "It's just a dream, Dee. Don't let it get to you." But Julian had said if they got hurt in the dream, they got hurt for real. The visitors were clustering around Dee, but they didn't seem alarmed. They seemed absolutely indifferent. One of them pushed a cart over to the far side of Dee's table. Jenny saw a tray of gleaming instruments. God, no, Jenny thought. Dee collapsed back on the table, exhausted. Another being picked up something long and shiny from the tray, examined it with lustrous black eyes. It flexed the thing a few times like a painter making practiced runs with a brush. It seemed dissatisfied, although with its mask-like face, Jenny didn't know how she could tell this. Then it casually flicked the thing up Dee's thigh and Dee screamed. It was like hearing your father scream. Jenny was so frightened that she tried to get up, and only succeeded in disarranging her legs slightly. One of the beings repositioned them carefully, stretching her feet toward the bottom corners of the table. She had never felt so open, so utterly vulnerable. These black spandex leggings gaped where the thing had cut it. Jenny could see blood. The being handed the instrument to one of the others, which took it away. If they were talking or communicating, Jenny couldn't sense it. Certainly, nobody tried to communicate with Dee or Jenny. They were moving around again. One of them, the same one who had cut Dee, took up a new instrument and went to Jenny's table. With a swift, deft movement, the being touched the instrument to Jenny's hand. Jenny felt a pinch. Then the probe went in her ear. Outraged, Jenny tried to roll her head away, but small hands, strong as claws inside mushroom flesh, held her forehead. She felt the probe go in deeper, and she screamed frantically. It touched her eardrum and hurt like a Q-tip stabbed too deep. She was completely helpless. Whatever they wanted to do to her, they would do. Tears of pain and fury trickled out of her eyes, down her temples. They put the probe in her other ear. One of them dabbed at her eye, holding the lid open. Jenny felt the touch of cool metal against her eyeball. "It's just a dream," she called to Dee. Almost sobbing when the probe was withdrawn. "It's not real." She couldn't hear any answer from the other table. What kind of game was this, where you didn't have a chance? Julian had talked about getting through the nightmares, but Jenny didn't think that meant just waiting for them to pass. She was supposed to do something, but she didn't know what, and she couldn't move. And she didn't think she and Dee were going to survive this if they just lay here. "What do you want from us?" she shouted. "What are we supposed to do?" There was a shifting among the visitors. A new kind of being had arrived, taller than the others, clearly in command, with skin as white as wax. Its fingers were twice as long as a human's, although Jenny got only a glimpse of its face. It looked more menacing than the other kind, its features even more exaggerated. It picked something up from the instrument cart and went over to the far side of Dee's table. It looked up at Jenny, and she saw its eyes were blue, not glittering black like the other being's eyes. Blue lakes, endlessly deep, deep as a mountain is high, eyes that looked inside you. Jenny stared back, her own eyes widening. Then she saw what it was holding. A needle, wire-thin, murderously long, longer than the needle for a spinal tap. The tall visitor was holding it over Dee's stomach. Dee's stomach was heaving wildly in a fight for breath. Her khaki t-shirt was sticking to her body as she writhed in a futile attempt to escape. Her sweat-soaked hair glistened like mica in the light. "Don't touch her!" Jenny cried. To watch it happen to Dee was worse than having it happen to herself. The needle hovered just below Dee's navel. Dee's abdomen went concave trying to avoid it. Dee made rocking, shifting motions as if trying to shimmy up the table. But she only moved in place. The light above her intensified, and abruptly her struggles became weaker. "You bastard! Leave her alone!" "What can I do?" Jenny thought. She had to stop this, but how? The light. It came to her suddenly. The light above her had dimmed as Dee's had brightened. Maybe she could move now. And if she could move... She began to rock. She had some control over her body. Not much. Her arms and legs were still useless, like huge pieces of dead meat attached to her. But she could move her trunk and her head and neck. Using all her strength, she rocked her weight from one side to the other. Dee saw her. All the other eyes in the room, all those slanted liquidy black eyes and the one pair of deep blue, were on Dee's stomach, on the needle. But Dee's thrashing head had turned toward Jenny, and just for a moment the two of them were looking at each other, communicating without words. Then Dee began to struggle again. The harder Dee fought, the brighter the light over Dee. The brighter the light over Dee, the dimmer the light over Jenny. "Fall off this table and you'll have no way to control it," Jenny's mind told her. "A broken arm or leg at least, and maybe a broken nose. You'll smash into the floor face down." She kept on rocking. Maybe Dee thought she was just trying to get away, but what Jenny cared about was distracting them, stopping that thing with its two long fingers from putting the needle in Dee. If she hurt herself, they would have to come to deal with her. They would leave Dee alone. She swung her torso harder and harder, like a beetle trying to upend itself. Dee was fighting madly, yelling out insults to keep the alien's attention. The light above Jenny dimmed further. Jenny surged violently and felt her momentum take her over the edge. For a moment, She teetered there, balanced on her side. Then the dead weight of her arms and legs decided the issue, and she felt herself begin to fall. There was a burst of startled movement from the aliens, and the light flamed into brightness above her. It didn't matter in the least. It wasn't her muscles that were in charge. It was the law of gravity. Something nobody could argue with, Jenny thought. Searing illumination was reflecting off the white floor, and Jenny shut her eyes as that floor seemed to come up to meet her. She flinched away from the moment of impact. When the impact didn't come, she opened her eyes. She was floating, face down, an inch or so from the floor, suspended, paralyzed. The aliens were scuttling around hysterically, as if they weren't programmed to deal with this, as if they were as surprised by her mid-air arrest as she was. The painful reflection on the floor softened. Jenny was still floating. It was a very strange sensation. The small aliens were still moving around in consternation. Jenny could see by their feet. A bunch of them crowded between the tables and lifted Jenny back to hers. She was positioned too high. She felt her ponytail hanging over the edge of the table, and the light above her was dimmer. Maybe somebody who hadn't been staring up at it for half an hour wouldn't notice, but Jenny did. The blue-eyed alien with the needle was beside her. She expected it to touch her, but it didn't. It just looked down, and Jenny looked back. "Why didn't you let me fall?" she thought. Abruptly, the tall alien turned away. It motioned to the others, then walked out the octagonal doorway of the round room. Several of the small ones followed it, pushing the cart. Several others came and poured green liquid into Jenny's mouth. It tasted like sugar and iodine. Jenny spit it out. They restrained her head and poured her mouth full again. This time she shut her lips, holding the liquid inside her mouth, doing her best not to swallow any. She could have struck out at them. She could feel her fingers again, but she pretended she couldn't move. And then, blessedly, they went away. Jenny turned her head and spat her mouthful out. Her lips and tongue were numb. She saw Dee doing the same. They looked at each other, then at the lights. "Both dimmer," Jenny whispered. Dee nodded. Then, eyes on the doorway, they squirmed and rocked themselves off the tables. It wasn't easy, but with the lights this dim, it was possible. Jenny, with no training in how to fall, bruised her arm and knee, but Dee was already pulling her up, out of the influence of the white light. Outside its circle, Jenny could move freely. "Look," she said, seizing Dee's arm. It was a door, concave, set in the wall that had been behind Jenny's head. It looked like an airplane door, which Jenny recognized because she had once spent 5 hours studying one when her family flew to Florida on vacation. And which was absurd, Jenny thought fretfully. Why should aliens have airplane doors? Dee wasn't worried about it. She was moving levers and things. The door swung away outward. Jenny shrieked. She had never liked heights, and this was much higher than she had ever been in the open air. She could see clouds below. But we both went for the door instinctively, she thought. It must be right. We went into Dee's room and the door disappeared. This is the first door we have seen since. It's got to be the way out. She still felt faint when she looked down. "I don't care. I'd rather die than stay here. Besides, I always wanted to skydive," Dee said, grabbing Jenny's hand, and jumped. Jenny really screamed then. Whistling wind slapped her face. Jenny's eyes screwed shut against it. Everything was icy cold around her. She felt weightless, but she knew she was falling. "If this is flying, I don't think I like it." She didn't exactly faint then, but things got very confused. She couldn't see or hear anything until she hit an ochre-painted door with a thud, Dee tumbling behind her. From their direction and velocity, they must have been thrown through Dee's bedroom window by a giant fist. The door opened as she struck it, and she and Dee both fell into the hallway. The haunted mansion hallway, dark as a crypt. Jenny stared into the golden glow of Dee's bedroom. Then the door whisked by her nose and slammed shut. She and Dee lay panting while their eyes gradually adjusted to the dimness. Dee leaned over and slowly, deliberately punched Jenny in the biceps. "We did it, killer," she said. "You saved me." "We're alive," Jenny said wonderingly. "We got through. Dee, do you realize what happened? We won." "Of course," Dee said. She poked her fingers into the hole in her leggings, and Jenny saw that the cut was still there, the blood drying. Then Dee flipped up her shirt. Jenny could count ribs under the velvety night-dark skin. Below Dee's dark blue sports bra, there was no mark above the navel. I told you, you saved me. That was my worst nightmare. Those things poking at me, and me not able to stop them. We both did it by using our brains, Jenny said. Anyway, now we know what to do in the nightmares. Once we are inside, we look for a door. Any door. Hey, what's that? A scrap of paper showed white against the black carpet. Jenny smoothed it out and saw it was a drawing, done in crayons. A black thing like a bowler hat was hovering above stick trees with rays of scribbled light around it. I never could draw very well, Dee said, but you get the idea. Now, what do we do? Fear of the aliens had left its mark on Dee's face. But she also looked exhilarated, triumphant, ready for anything. Jenny was suddenly very grateful to have this beautiful, brave girl on her side. We find the others, she said. We look for another door. She dropped the crumpled paper on the floor and stood, offering Dee a hand up. An unseen clock struck 11. Jenny stiffened. That's it. The clock I heard in the parlor. It's counting off the hours. He said dawn was at 6:11. 7 hours and change, Dee said. Plenty of time. Jenny said nothing, but her little fingers tingled. She couldn't explain it, but she had the feeling Dee was going to be proved very wrong. Chapter 7. The hallway seemed to stretch forever in both directions. The stairway had disappeared. It's changed, she said. It keeps changing. Why? Dee shook her head. And who knows which way to go? We'd better separate. Jenny nearly objected to this, but after what they had been through, well, she should be able to handle a hallway alone. She stared down it and immediately lost sight of Dee. It seemed almost normal to be walking down an impossible black-carpeted hall like something out of a horror movie. I guess you can get used to anything, Jenny thought. After the blinding white sterility of the alien ship, this dim place looked almost cozy. There were no doors, even the monster one, which should have been somewhere back this way, had disappeared. The tiny flames of the candles went on endlessly ahead. As Jenny stopped under one to rest, she thought suddenly of the riddle she had pushed to the back of her mind earlier. If it would get one of them out of here, she ought to try to solve it. I am just 2 and 2. I am hot, I am cold. I am the parents of numbers that cannot be told. I am a gift beyond measure. a matter of course, and I am yielded with pleasure when taken by force. What could it possibly mean? Two and two, hot and cold? It was probably something childishly simple. How do you like the game so far? The voice was like silk-wrapped steel. Jenny turned fast. Julian was leaning against the wall. He had changed clothes again. He was wearing ordinary black jeans and a black t-shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Seeing him suddenly was like the first moment in the morning when the shower flicks on, a shock of cold awareness. "Was it you?" she said. "In the ship up there?" "That would be telling," he said, but for an instant his eyelids drooped, heavy lashes coming down. "Why didn't you let me fall?" "Did you know your eyes are dark as cypress trees? That means you're unhappy. When you're happy, they get lighter. They go all goldy green." "How would you know? You've never seen me happy." He gave her a laughing glance. "Is that what you think? I'm a shadow man, Jenny." While Jenny was trying to figure this out, he went right on. "Cypress eyes and sun-glowing skin, and your hair's like liquid amber. Why do you wear it back like that?" "Because Tom likes it," Jenny said reflexively, her standard response. "Look, what did you mean?" He shook his head, clicking his tongue. "May I?" he said politely, straightening up. His tone was so normal, so solicitous, that Jenny nodded automatically. She was still intent on her question. "What did you—" "No, don't." He had pulled the elastic band out of her ponytail. Jenny felt her hair fall about her neck, and then his fingers were in it. An almost imperceptible shudder went through Jenny. "Don't," she said again. She didn't know how to deal with this situation. He wasn't being rough. He still looked solicitous and friendly. It didn't seem appropriate to hit him in the gut as Dee had taught her to do with guys that annoyed her. "Beautiful," he murmured. His touch was as light as the soft pat of a cat's paw, and his voice was like black velvet. "Don't you like it?" "No," Jenny said, but she could feel the heat in her face. She was backed against the wall now. She didn't know how to get away from him, and the worst thing was that her body didn't seem sure it wanted to. His cool fingers moved against her warm hair roots, and she felt a trembling thrill. "Have I told you about your mouth?" he said. "No?" "It's soft, short upper lip, full lower, just about perfect, except that it's usually a little wistful." There's something you want, Jenny, that you are not getting. I have to go now, Jenny said in a rush, her standard stuck with a jerk at a party response. She was so confused she didn't care if it didn't make sense here. You don't have to go anywhere. He seemed unable to take his eyes away from her face for a second. Jenny had never held anyone's gaze for this long, and she had never even dreamed of eyes like his. I could show you what it is you've been wanting, he said. Will you let me? Let me show you, Jenny. His voice seemed to steal the bones from her body. She was aware of shaking her head slightly, as much in response to the new feelings as to his question. She didn't know what was happening to her. Tom's touch made her feel safe, but this made her feel weak inside, as if her stomach were falling. Let me show you, he said again, so softly she could barely hear him. His fingers were so gentle as they laced in her hair, urging her to tilt her face up toward him. His lips were bare inches from her. Jenny felt herself flowing toward him. Oh, stop, she said. Stop. Do you really want me to? Yes. All right. To her astonishment, he stepped back, fingers trailing out of her hair. Jenny could still feel them. I almost kissed him, she thought, not the other way around. In another minute I would have. Tom, oh, Tom. Why are you doing this? She said, her eyes filling again. He sighed. I told you I fell in love with you. I didn't do it on purpose. But we're so different, Jenny whispered. She was still feeling weak at the knees. Why should you want me? Why? He looked at her, head tilted slightly, quizzically. Don't you know? His eyes moved to her lips. Light to darkness, Jenny. Darkness to light. It's always been that way. I don't know what you're talking about. And she didn't. She wouldn't let herself understand it. Suppose the devil was just quietly minding his own business when he saw a girl who made him forget everything. There've been other girls more beautiful, of course, but this girl had something, a goodness, a sweetness about her, an innocence, something simple he wanted to destroy it. No, no, to cherish it, to warm his cold heart. Even a poor devil can dream, can't he? You are trying to trick me. Am I? There was something oddly serious in his blue eyes. I won't listen to you. You can't make me listen. True. For just an instant, Julian looked tired. Then he gave his strange half-smile. Then there's no choice but to keep playing, is there? No choice for either of us. Julian, what? Jenny caught herself up short, shaking her head. He was crazy, but one thing she believed. He really was in love with her. She knew, somehow, that it was true. She also knew something else about him. She had known it since that instant when she had looked into his eyes and seen the ancient shadows there. She had known it when he had humiliated Tom and terrorized Dee. He was evil, cruel, capricious, and dangerous as a cobra, a prince of darkness. Completely evil and completely in love with her. How was she supposed to reconcile that? "If you want me so much," she said, "why don't you just take me then? Why go through all this with the game? You could grab me any time. Why don't you just do it?" His heavy lashes drooped again. In that instant he looked exactly like the boy in the More Games store, almost vulnerable, almost human. Realization came to Jenny. "Because you can't," she breathed. "You can't, can you? You can't just do anything you want to, not even here." His eyes flashed up, glittering like a snake's. Jenny saw pure violence there. "This is my world. I make the rules here." "No!" Giddy triumph was swelling through Jenny. An effervescent rush. "Not this one. That's why you asked if you could touch my hair. That's why you tried to make me kiss you. You can't do it without my permission." "Be careful, Jenny," he said. His face was cold and cruel. Jenny just laughed excitedly. "If you can kiss me against my will, then prove it," she said. "Show me. Do it now." And then she added an Italian phrase she had picked up from Audrey. "Come Ursi." It meant, "I dare you." He didn't move. Jenny laughed again. "I don't think you understand," he said. "I am going to have you at any cost. Any cost, Jenny, even if you have to suffer on the way. If I can't force you, I'll persuade you, and I can be very persuasive." Jenny felt some of the triumph fold up inside her. "Remember where you are, Jenny, whose territory you are on. Remember what I can do in the game." Jenny was completely sober now. "You challenged me. Now I suppose I'll have to show you what I am capable of." "I don't care what you do to me. Maybe it won't be to you. See your friend there? She's playing the game too." He was looking down the hallway, in the same direction Jenny had been going, barely visible until a far candle was the copper glint of someone's hair. Jenny drew in her breath. "Don't you dare!" Turning back to speak to him, Jenny broke off. Julian was gone. She was alone. Jenny bit her lip. It was infuriating to talk to someone who could do that, and she was beginning to think it hadn't been a very good idea to laugh at him. Nothing to be done about it now. "Audrey," she called, and started down the hall. Audrey's skin, usually pale as magnolia blossoms, was touched with a golden glow from the candles, and her auburn hair flashed copper. She and Jenny hugged, and Jenny thought only Audrey could stay so calm, so chic, in such awful circumstances. "You look as if any minute you are going to be demanding to see your ambassador," Jenny said. "If Daddy were here, he'd take care of things," Audrey agreed. "He'd come out of retirement to take this place on. Are you all right? You look a little flushed." Jenny put a hand to her cheek self-consciously. "It's the light," she said. How long have you been here? I mean, did you see me before I called?" "No. I'd been looking and looking for anybody, but all I've seen is this interminable hallway." "Good. I mean, it's good that I found you. The only other person I've seen is Dee. She's back there, and she's just been through hell. And you're next, if I'm right about the way this works. I'll explain as we go." The explanation about how they were all scattered, about finding doors in the nightmares, about the dawn time limit, and about how things in the nightmares could hurt you, took until they found Dee. They did find Dee, to Jenny's relief, standing beside a door. "I thought I'd better guard it to make sure it didn't go anywhere," she said after a perfunctory nod at Audrey. Audrey had only one question. "Is he Nordic, that guy? They're supposed to be sexy as all get out." Jenny ignored this. "Since the doors move, how do we know this isn't one of the two we opened before?" "We don't," Dee said, and flashed the smile. Dee's wild, leaping beauty always annoyed Audrey. "Of course, it doesn't have a key like the first one, but I guess we'd better get in monster position again. Anything could be inside." She and Jenny did, ready to kick the door shut fast. Audrey's eyebrows lifted into her spiky bangs. "No, thank you," she said politely. "Not in a fitted linen skirt. Listen, you two. Why are we doing this at all? Why don't we just sit down and refuse to play?" "Didn't you listen to me before?" Jenny said. "If we are still here by dawn, we stay for good. We lose automatically." "I have never lost anything by default," Dee said. Then she said, "Now." Behind the door there was a forest. Cool wind blew out, ruffling Jenny's loose hair against her cheek. It smelled like summer camp. "God," said Jenny. "Well, come on," Audrey said, flicking her perfectly polished nails in a gesture of readiness. "We might as well get it over with." "It's too weird," Jenny said as they stepped inside. Outside. Dee's bedroom was a room at least, but this. They were on the outskirts of a dark forest on a sloping hill. Above them the night sky was strewn with stars much bigger and brighter than the ones Jenny usually saw from her Vista Grande backyard. A moon of pure silver was rising. The door had slammed and disappeared, of course, as soon as they stepped through. Behind Jenny were meadows and pastures. Before her a tangled mass of pitch-black trunks and bushes. The girls were alone on the hill in the moonlight. "Now what?" Audrey said, shivering fastidiously. "Don't you know? It's your nightmare. You drew it." "I drew a picture of me opening the Bloomies catalogue and finding it blank," Audrey said. "That's my worst nightmare." "Don't look at me that way. Shopping is cheaper than therapy." And that was all she would say about it. There were a few scattered lights in the valley below them. "But it's too far to hike," Jenny said, "and even if we did get down there, I don't think that there would really be any people." Audrey looked at her strangely, but Dee nodded. "It feels like one of those model train landscapes, or like a stage set," she said. "False fronts. You're right. I don't think we would find little houses with people in them down there." Which means they faced the forest bleakly. "Why do I have a bad feeling about this?" Jenny asked. "Come on," Dee said. "Let's make it happen." The forest looked solid, but with Dee in the lead, they found a way into it. It was mostly pine and fir trees, with the occasional beech shining silvery grey against the darkness of the background. "Oh my God," Audrey said after they had been walking some time. "High ground, evergreen trees, rocks. I know where we are now. It's the Black Forest." "Sounds like something from a story," Jenny muttered, picking her way through the undergrowth. "It's a real place. I saw it when I was 8, when Daddy was at the German embassy. It scared me a little, because it was the forest, you know." Dee threw a derisive glance over her shoulder. "The forest?" "The forest where everything happened, where the Grimm brothers got all their fairy tales, you know, Snow White, Hansel and Gretel, Little Red Riding Hood and the—" Audrey stopped in mid-sentence. In front of her, Dee had stopped too. Jenny's knees locked. Just ahead of them, in the tangled blackness, yellow eyes glowed. Jenny even imagined she could see moonlight gleaming off sharp teeth. All three girls stood very still. Seconds passed and the yellow eyes remained motionless. Then they seemed to shift to a different angle so that one went out. Both flashed towards the girls again. Then both went out. Jenny heard underbrush crunching. The sound got fainter. It faded into a profound silence in which Jenny could hear her heart beating strong and very fast in her chest. Jenny let out her breath. Dee's shoulders heaved slightly. She reached down and picked up a long stick almost as thick as her own slim wrist. She settled it in her hand, waggling it, testing her grip. It made a good weapon. "And the wolf," said Audrey, her voice suspiciously calm. She tucked stray wisps of hair into her French twist, her lips tight. The three of them looked at one another, then started walking again. What else was there to do? It was strange, that wolf coming just when you were talking about one, Dee said. Unless Jenny stopped dead. Wait, she said. Something had fallen into place with an almost audible click. Let me think a minute. Yes, it wasn't strange at all that the wolf came when Audrey was talking about it. Don't you see? He's taking it all from our own minds. Who? Audrey said. Her well-bred nostrils flared. Who do you think? Julian, the Shadow Man. He's creating the game around us, or we're doing it. But either way, it's made up of our own thoughts. That hallway back in the house is the hallway from the haunted mansion at Disneyland. It always scared me as a kid, so it came from my mind. And the door in the UFO was like a plane door I'd seen. These eyes flashed like a jaguar's. And the parlor. I saw a lamp like that once in Jamestown. I wondered what it was doing here. Everything, every detail is coming from us, Jenny said. Not just big things, but little things. He's using our minds against us. So what's going to happen? Dee asked Audrey. You're the one who should know what scares you most. I mean, should we be on the lookout for walking trees or little hooded men or what? Or was that wolf it? I was only 8 when I lived here, Audrey said coldly. And no, I don't remember specifically which story disturbed me most. I had a German nurse, and she told me all of them. She and Dee glared at each other. We could run into something from any of our minds, Jenny said, to make peace. Anything could happen here. You can feel it. She knew in her heart that it was going to be something worse than the wolf, something more unmundane. Audrey didn't like anything supernatural, so it followed that whatever happened was going to be very. Remember, it's all a dream, she told herself, but she could hear Julian's voice in her mind. I can tell you right off that one of you probably won't make it. They walked. Underbrush clutched at Jenny's skirt like little fingers. The fragrance of evergreens surrounded them like 1,000 Christmas trees. All Jenny could see was darkness and the endless tangle of forest ahead. Her nerves stretched and stretched. They literally stumbled on the clearing. One large tree grew there. A yew, Jenny thought. It stood in front of a giant jumble of rocks and boulders that looked as if they might have been left by a glacier. The tree had rough bark, dark green needles, and red berries. Gathered around it was a group of young men in weird clothes. They were wearing pants and long over-tunics of leather trimmed with fur, very old-fashioned looking. Their arms were bare and muscular. The ground beside the tree had been cleared and a circle drawn on it. Inside the circle, a fire burned, and red light glinted off daggers and what looked like drinking horns. The whole area was decorated with flowers. It's some kind of secret ceremony, Dee whispered, and we're spying on it, she added with considerable relish. They are certainly good-looking, Audrey murmured. They were. Jenny counted 7 of them, 4 with blonde hair and 3 with blondish brown. They looked as if they were in their late teens or early 20s, and if what they were doing was secret, they weren't bothering to be quiet about it. Jenny could hear laughter and boisterous singing. Good grief, it's like a fraternity party, she thought. Even this far away, she could smell the beer. I think, said Audrey, I'm beginning to like this game. She stepped out before Jenny could stop her. The singing fell silent. 7 faces turned toward the girls. Then one of the German boys lifted a drinking horn over his head, and all the rest cheered. They all seemed surprised but delighted to see the girls. White, even teeth flashed in friendly smiles, and they bundled the visitors over to the warmth of the fire. Audrey's bare legs caused a lot of appreciative comment, as did Dee's spandex leggings. No, no thanks, Jenny said as one of them tried to get her to drink the stuff in his horn. The horn had angular symbols carved on it that made her nervous somehow. They reminded her of something. Audrey, what are they saying? I can't catch it all. It's not like the German I learned. Audrey said, seated between two admirers. Her cool porcelain beauty contrasted with her flirtatious lashes. I think it must be Archie, but that one is saying that you're like Sif. It's a compliment. Sif was a goddess with shining golden hair. Oh, give me a break. Dee backed up to sit on a rock. There was an instant stirring among the German boys. Several pulled Dee away from the rock pile, shaking their heads. Dee barely allowed them to move her, not at all placated by the way they marveled over her dark skin, and she only snorted when one offered her a garland of flowers to wear. "Oh, put it on," Jenny said, flicking a small bug out of her own wreath. She was starting to enjoy this. The young men were very nice, even if they did smell a bit like sweat. They were about the most strapping youths she had ever seen, but several of them had braids in their hair, and they didn't seem to think weaving garlands was sissy. "It's a ceremony to greet the spring," Audrey said, as one of the blondes cried, "Ostara," and poured beer on the ground. "Ostara's the goddess of spring. That's where we get Easter." The young men began to chant. "It's something about life being renewed," Audrey said. "There's something else, something I can't quite make out. They are asking, petitioning." All the German boys were on their feet by now, urging the girls to rise. They were facing the huge pile of boulders. "Dokal far," they chanted. "That's dark. Something I don't. Oh my God!" Audrey's voice changed completely. She tried to pull away from the circle, but two of the German boys grabbed her. "Dark elves," she said wildly. "That's what they're saying. They came here to ask favors from the elves, and we are the yielding." Jenny had never heard Audrey's voice like that before, bordering on hysteria. "The what?" she demanded. Suddenly the white, even smiles around her didn't look so friendly. "The gift to the other world. The sacrifice," Audrey cried. She was trying to get away again, but it was no good. "We are outnumbered more than 2 to 1, Jenny thought, "and they've all got muscles." She looked at Dee and felt shock ripple over her. Dee was laughing. Snickering actually, chortling. "Elves?" she gasped. "Little pixies in bluebells? Little guys who sit on acorns?" "No, you idiot," Audrey said through her teeth. "Dark elves. Outdwellers. Oh, you don't understand." Jenny heard rock scraping. One of the huge stones in front of her was moving. It swung out slowly, pushing the ridge of dirt along in front of it. A black, gaping hole was revealed in the pile, a tunnel leading down. Dee's laughter was dying, but it was too late. The girls were pushed forward into the hole. Jenny tried to turn, but her Capezio flats slithered on dust and grit, and she felt herself falling. Chapter 8. Rock scraped on rock, and the moonlight was cut off above them. Audrey was lying in a ball beside Jenny near the bottom of the slope. Dee had been shoved backward and was sprawled at the very bottom, legs higher than her head. In those first moments, Jenny didn't stop to wonder how she could still see either of them. She said, "Are you all right?" to Dee, and then wrapped her arms around Audrey comfortingly. Audrey was shaking, making little moaning sounds. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," Jenny said, hugging her. "It's not your fault." Dee was picking herself up, her fine-boned face contemptuous. "What's her problem, anyway?" Jenny twisted her head to snap at Dee, but the words never got out. She could now see the reason they weren't in pitch darkness. There was a semicircle of lanterns around the bottom of the slope, and holding the lanterns were people. Dee had fallen silent. The lantern light reflected off faces that were disturbing, to say the least. The elves were very pale, very beautiful, but very strange. Their eyes were slanted in a way that reminded Jenny of the visitors. Their cheekbones were almost too high and sharp, and they stood oddly. They didn't look as if they had any sympathy to appeal to. One of them said something. Jenny thought it was the same language that the young men outside had used, but the elf's voice was more liquid and more cold. It was obvious that he was ordering the girls up. Jenny didn't want to obey. She was irrationally frightened by these pale, beautiful people. Then she saw that maybe her fear wasn't so irrational. They were like animals, or parts of them were. They were deformed. The elf who had spoken had one normal hand and one hand like a cow's split hoof. It was black and shiny like patent leather. Jenny was afraid she was going to be sick. Another of them had a tail hanging out of his breeches, a long, pink, naked tail like a rat's. It swished. A third had two little hornbuds swelling on his forehead. A fourth had glossy dark hair growing on his neck. Every one of them had some deformity, and they were real. not like the pasted-together monstrosities Jenny had seen in the Ripley's Believe It or Not exhibit. "Audrey, you've got to get up," she whispered, swallowing the bile that had risen in her throat. "Audrey, if you don't, I think they'll make you." Then, with desperate inspiration, "Do you want them to see you lying here like this? I bet your mascara's smeared halfway down your face." The appeal to Audrey's pride worked where nothing else might have. She slowly sat up, brushing at her cheeks. "It's waterproof," she said defiantly. Her fingers went automatically to adjust the combs in her French twist, and then she saw the elves. Her chestnut eyes widened until they showed white all around. She was staring at the cow's hoof hand. Jenny gripped her arm tightly. "Are they what you thought they were?" Audrey pressed her lips together and nodded. The elf spoke again, sharply, stepping forward. Audrey cringed back. Slowly and carefully, Jenny urged her to stand. "Audrey, we've got to go with them," she whispered. She was afraid that if Audrey balked, the elves were going to touch them. The thought of that, of being touched by that shiny hoof, or by the flipper she saw one of the others had, was more than Jenny could bear. "Please, Audrey," she whispered. It was easy for the elves to lead them. All they had to do was close in from one direction and the girls would move in the other. They walked like that, surrounded by a circle of lanterns, down a passage that sloped on and on. Other passages branched away. Clearly the place was big, and they were going deeper and deeper into it. Walking calmed Jenny a little. The rocks around them took every imaginable shape, some like twisting antlers, others like wind-blown grass. There were lacy falls of angel hair, and huge columns covered with formations like exquisite flowers or the gills of mushrooms. The air smelled like rain-damp earth. It was surprisingly warm. Jenny tightened her supporting grip on Audrey's arm. "Say something to them," she suggested. "Ask them where we're going." In her own way, Audrey was as brave as Dee. Her spiky eyelashes were starred together from crying, and she didn't look at the elf beside her, but she spoke to him in level tones. "He says they're taking us to the Earl King," she said after a moment. Now Jenny could hear thought shaking control in her voice. "That means Elf King, I think. I remember the story about the Earl King now. He is a kind of evil spirit who haunts the Black Forest. He is supposed to take people, especially young girls and children." Dee pounced. "Why girls?" Audrey spoke between clenched teeth. "You guess." "But all the dark elves are that way." "Well, look at them. They are all men. It's a male race." With a shock, Jenny realized that it was true. The delicacy of their features had fooled her. Every one of their captors was beautiful and male. Dee's grin was bloodthirsty. Time to fight. No, Jenny said tensely. Her heart was pounding, but she tried to quiet it. There are too many of them. We wouldn't have a chance. And anyway, we are supposed to face our nightmares, remember? If the Earl King is what Audrey's most afraid of, he must be what we have to face. It's a stupid nightmare anyway, Dee hissed, her supple shoulders hunching as if an ice cube were going down her back. Believe me, Audrey said bitingly, I wish you weren't in it with me. The two girls ignored each other as they walked on through subterranean caverns of cathedral spaciousness. Glittering white gypsum crystals powdered everything, catching the lantern light. Coarse rock dust crunched underneath Jenny's feet. I don't understand, Audrey whispered. This can't have come out of my mind. I've never seen anything like it. I have, Dee said, and even her voice was subdued. Spelunking in New Mexico, but it wasn't so much. At last they reached the biggest cavern of all. They passed giant red pillars like coral reefs, which gave Jenny the disconcerting feeling of being underwater. They were heading straight for an enormous wall of flame-colored rock. It wasn't flat, it went rippling up and up like an inverted Niagara Falls. At floor level, there was an irregularly shaped gap in the wall, like an entrance. The castle, Audrey translated quietly. They passed through the gap in the red walls. Inside, the elves moved to separate the girls into two groups. It happened so fast that Jenny didn't have time to react. All in an instant she was being herded away, and when she twisted her head frantically, she saw Dee and Audrey being borne in the opposite direction. She saw Audrey's copper head bobbing and heard Dee's voice raised in fury. Then Dee's voice faded, and Jenny was led through a gap into a large room. One of her captors said something ending with Earl Koenig, and they all walked out. When Jenny looked through the gap, she found they were standing sentry on either side. Now what? She looked around. The rock formations here were like huge sand castles, half melted by water in white and gold. Jenny realized she was seeing by moonlight and looked up. The ceiling had openings in it like skylights or chimneys in the rock. She studied them for a while. Finally, there was nothing to do but wait and worry. What was happening to Tom right now? She wondered. Think about the riddle, she told herself firmly. It'll pass the time and it might be useful. I am just 2 and 2. I am hot. I am cold. I am the parent of numbers that cannot be told. I am a gift beyond measure, a matter of course, and I am yielded with pleasure when taken by force. Suddenly she had it. Yes, something that could be hot and passionate or cold and impersonal. Something that could be the parent of untold numbers of people, because there was no counting how many babies had gotten started with it. Something that was just two and two, two lips touching two lips, a kiss. Jenny smiled in triumph. She had solved the riddle. She could get one of the others free. There was no question, of course, about who it would be. Much as she loved her friends, Tom would always come first. The only problem with having solved the riddle was that she now had nothing to think about except whatever was going to happen to her. The elf who had left had said, "Earl Konig." The Earl King? Was that who she was waiting for? What kind of deformity would the Earl King have? She wondered. Hooves? Horns? If he's king, he probably has something worse than all the others, she thought, and her heart chilled. Someone came through the gap in the stone, and Jenny braced herself. The next minute she realized how dense she had been. He was wearing a white tunic and breeches and soft white boots. They showed off how lithe and smoothly muscled he was. In the moonlight, his hair was silver as a mirror, and he was smiling. "Julian, welcome," he said, "to the Earl King's castle." The last time they had spoken, Jenny had been furious with him. It was hard to keep that in mind now. The white leather was so soft-looking, and it clung to him, hip and thigh. And there was something about a guy who looked at you with eyes like a starving tiger's. All at once, Jenny felt disconcerted. Tom always looked so good in ordinary clothes, but he was very conservative, never would dress up even at Halloween. Julian, by contrast, obviously got off on outrageous. His broad leather belt showed how flat his stomach was, emphasized his narrow hips. It was modestly encrusted with sapphires. Jenny wished she had one like it. The Earl King, huh? Enjoying the part? Immensely, Julian assured her gravely. At least you're talking to me in this nightmare, not like the UFO one, I mean. Jenny, I will happily talk to you all night. Thank you, but there's a time limit, and I'd rather have my friends back. Say the word. Jenny looked at him, startled, and then realized what word he meant. No, she said, I'll do it the hard way. We are going to get through all the nightmares, you know. We are going to win the game. I admire your confidence. You can admire my success. Starting now. I have solved your riddle, and you are a male chauvinist pig. It is not given with pleasure when taken by force. What isn't? A kiss. She turned to face him fully. That's the answer, isn't it? And you told me if I solved the riddle, you would let one of my friends go. Wrong. He waited for her reaction, eyes glinting in a wicked smile. I told you if you gave me the answer, I would let one of your friends go, but you haven't given it to me yet. His eyes lingered on her lips. Would you like to now? Fury sparked in Jenny. You. She turned away so he wouldn't have the satisfaction of seeing her angry. I have upset you. You're offended, he said. He sounded genuinely penitent. Jenny couldn't keep up with his mercurial changes of mood. Here, I'll give you something to make it up to you. Reluctantly, Jenny turned again. He was holding a rose. A white rose. Or maybe it was silver. In this light, it was hard to tell. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. As she took it, Jenny realized it wasn't real, but was exquisitely wrought, perfect down to the tiniest detail. Half opened, the blossom shimmered in her hands. The petals were cool but soft, made from silver dug out by black elves in the deepest mines of the earth, Julian said. Jenny shook her head at him. That's all folklore. Are you saying you are really the Earl King? Do you want me to believe in Hansel and Gretel too? I've been more things that you can imagine. And what I want you to believe is that children can go into dark places and disappear, after which people might tell stories to explain it, sometimes true stories, sometimes not. Jenny felt disconcerted again. Anyway, it's a beautiful rose, she said, and stroked it against her cheek. Julian's eyes gleamed. Let's go walking in the courtyard, he said. You can really see the moonlight there. The courtyard had a number of natural chimneys, and moonlight flooded down. Jenny felt almost awestruck at the beauty of the landscape. The moonlight threw a sort of magic sheen over everything, and the cavern was weirdly beautiful with its dark shadows and bright patches of silver. Julian looked the same. Every shadow on his face was dead black, and there were silver points in his eyes. Have you ever wondered why you can go into dangerous places without getting hurt? He said abruptly. Why the stray animals you pick up never bite you? And why you don't get mugged, or worse, when you wander around bad parts of town at night? People were always yelling at Jenny for exactly the things he was talking about. She herself had never given it much thought, but now a wild suspicion was rising in her mind. "No," she said. "No, I haven't." His eyes remained on hers. "I've been looking after you, Jenny, watching over you. No one can touch you, no one but me." "That's impossible." It came out in a whisper. "You—" "I've done those things all my life." Her sentences were coming untangled. "And I couldn't have been watching you that long? But I have. I have always loved you, Jenny." The power of his gaze was frightening. Jenny was confused by her own emotions. She knew she should feel only hatred, only anger toward him, but by now she had to admit that part of her was fascinated by him. He was a prince of darkness who had chosen her. She turned and walked away from him, trying to gather herself. "I have never been in love before," Julian said. "You are my first, and you will be my only." There was music in his voice, and the words settled like filigreed snowflakes around her, wrapping her in otherworldliness. Jenny turned around, and he touched her. His touch was as tenuous as gauze on her cheek. Jenny was so surprised she didn't move. Then she looked down stupidly. He had taken her hand. "But I thought you couldn't." His fingertips were as cool as jade against her skin. Tingles followed in her wake. She had an urge to press her cheek to his open hand. "Don't," she thought. "Don't, don't, don't." "Don't," she whispered. He went on stroking her hand, thumb gently circling in her palm, a sensuous and dangerous feeling. Jenny felt herself start to come undone. His touch was so delicate. He had disengaged her hand so gently from the rose. From the rose, Jenny thought. His gift. She had held it in her hand. She had stroked it against her right cheek, the cheek he was touching now. She stepped back. "You tricked me." He still held her hand. "Does it matter?" "Yes, it matters," Jenny said furiously, trying to pull out of his grasp. How could she have been so stupid? It was a game he was playing with her, to get permission to touch more and more of her. "I understand now. I'll never touch you or anything you give me. That trick won't work again." His lips were smiling, but there was something hot and deadly serious in his eyes. "Maybe not, but another one will. Believe me, Jenny, I am going to make you mine, entirely, before you finish the game." Jenny wished she could think of something more mature than to say, "in your dreams." "No, in yours," he said. "And remember, you are not alone here." Jenny heard a scream. "That's Audrey," she said. "That's Audrey. Something's happening to her." When he wouldn't release her hand, she jerked it out of his. Then she saw his eyes, and what she saw there froze her. You know, she whispered, you're doing it to get back at me. I warned you, he said. The screaming was still going on. Do you want it to stop? Evil, she thought. Absolute evil. Cruel, capricious, and dangerous as a cobra. I won't forget that again. I'll stop it myself, she said, her voice soft but fierce. I told you I was going to win this game, and I am, and I will never give in to you. She threw the silver rose at his feet. Then she was running for the sound of Audrey's screams. Elves rushed at her as she plunged out of the sand-castle room, but she veered sharply and got by them. Audrey's screams were getting clearer and clearer. Jenny saw a gap in the nearest red wall and ducked into it, and suddenly the screams echoed all around her. She saw Audrey sitting and Dee standing in front of her. She stumbled the last few feet to collapse beside them. What's wrong? Audrey was half sitting, half lying against the gypsum-encrusted wall of a small cavern. Her features were contorted with horror, and when Jenny turned, she saw why. She would have thought that after all she had been through, she would be inured to weird creatures. But these things were... Oh God, Audrey, what are they? She choked out. Audrey's fingernails bit into Jenny's arm. They are Drogar, living corpses. They have come for us. She turned away, retching. They smelled like corpses, the sickly sweet odor of decay. Some of them had blotted bodies, some had leathery skin fallen in and wrinkled. Some, to Jenny's horror, had skin that was sloughing off. One had thick fingernails turned brown by time and grown into long, dangling spirals. The nails clattered together, making a sound that raised goose flesh all over Jenny's body. They were completely blocking the exit. Jenny didn't know how she had gotten around them to reach Audrey, but there was no getting out again. They were closing in from all sides. When I tell you, run for the door, Dee said. What door? Dee pointed and Jenny turned. Beyond the nearest Drogar on the right was a wall, and there was a door in it. A Gothic door with an arched top painted blue. Okay, Dee shouted. Get ready for it. She had been standing with her left leg back, knee bent, all her weight on it. Her right leg was so bent that only the toe touched the floor. It made her look like a ballerina, but it was called the cat stance. Dee was always trying to teach Jenny kung fu stances. Suddenly she kicked, her right foot snapping up flat to strike the Drogar under the jaw with her heel. With a dry crack, the Drogar's head fell backward, all the way backward. Its neck was snapped. The terrible thing was that it kept walking, head resting on its own shoulder blades, blundering a wrong way. It kept walking. Jenny let go and screamed. "Get up!" Dee shouted to them. "Now, while I've got them distracted. Get out of here." Audrey remained frozen. "We can't leave you." "Don't worry about me. Just go. Jenny, take her." Jenny obeyed the tone of command instinctively. She hauled Audrey up by her houndstooth jacket and pulled her to the door. She wrenched it open, and they both fell through it. It slammed behind them before Jenny could stop it. She and Audrey looked at each other in dismay, and then they waited. They waited until a sick feeling in Jenny's stomach told her Dee wasn't going to come. Audrey was crying. Jenny tried the door handle. It wouldn't budge. "It's my fault," Audrey whispered. "One of you probably won't make it." The door flew open. Dee charged through it, slammed it behind her, leaned on it. She expelled a great gust of air. "That was close," she said, "but I've been dying for a fight, and it was a good one." She was glowing with exertion and the joy of the battle. She looked at Audrey. "Well, aren't you a mess?" she said. Audrey's glossy auburn hair was hanging around her face. Her spiky bangs were plastered damply to her forehead. Her cheeks were flushed and wet. Her hands and legs scratched and scraped. Her cherry lipstick was gone. Face inscrutable, Audrey held out one hand and slowly unclenched the fingers. On her palm were the combs from her French twist. "At least I still have these," she said calmly. All three of them burst into hysterical laughter. They laughed and laughed in a violent release of emotion. "I guess that counts as winning, getting out of your nightmare alive with your combs intact," Dee gasped finally. Audrey raised her eyebrows, and then her lips curled again in a smile. She and Dee were smiling at each other. An unseen clock struck 12. "Midnight," Jenny said. It came out softly, almost a whisper. Every time they won, that clock chimed to remind them that time was passing fast. Where was it, anyway? The sound seemed to pervade the entire house. 6 hours until dawn, Dee was saying to Audrey, "and only 5 nightmares to go. We're fine. We'll make it. Easy." "Easy? I don't think so," Audrey said. "Look," Jenny said quietly, bending to pick up a scrap of paper.